with the Washington office on Latin America and with Cristosal. Since coming to office about 2 years ago, President Nayib Bukele has shaken up El Salvador's political system. Salvadorans appear to like what they see. Bukele's approval ratings are sky high, and midterm elections last week gave his Nuevas party a strong majority in the national legislature. But almost from the start, Bukele's apparent contempt for democratic norms has raised serious concerns. Bukele has ignored court orders, bullied lawmakers and the independent press, and wagged his finger at criticism from the US Congress and State Department. Now that Bukele will govern with a large legislative majority that could give him control over the country's Supreme Court and Attorney General, El Salvador's young democratic institutions appear especially fragile, and the country's relationship with the United States is facing fresh scrutiny. When Bukele made an unannounced visit to Washington last month, Biden administration officials reportedly refused to meet with him. Today, we will hear from 3 leading experts on the trajectory of democratic governance in El Salvador, the consequences of the midterm elections, the role of the international community, and efforts to shore up El Salvador's institutional framework, including by strengthening the International Commission Against Impunity in El Salvador, CCS. With this in mind, I'm very pleased to welcome Julia Gabarete, a journalist with El Faro, Leonor Arteaga, Program Director at DPLF, and Noah Bullock, Executive Director of Cristosal. Our moderator today will be Adriana Beltran, Director of the Citizen Security Program at WOLA, and one of Washington's leading experts on the Northern Triangle. Welcome to you all. Just as a reminder, you can follow this event on Twitter at #ElSalvadorDDHH, at The Dialogue, at DPLFinfo, at Cristosal, and at WOLA_org. We invite participants to send questions through the Q&A function on Zoom or to email questions to meetings@thedialogue.org, and we'll turn to your questions. You can send them in English or in Spanish at the end of today's conversation. So before turning the event over to Adriana, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce and welcome Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. Congressman McGovern is chairman of the House Rules Committee. He's also the Democratic co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And he's a leading congressional voice on both Latin America and human rights. And I think it's safe to say that nobody on Capitol Hill knows El Salvador as well as Congressman McGovern does. He has visited El Salvador over 100 times, beginning in the early 1980s, when as a young congressional staffer, he led the Moakley Commission's investigation of the murder of 6 Jesuit priests, their housekeeper, and her daughter. That investigation changed the trajectory of US policy towards El Salvador, and Congressman McGovern has, in the decades since, remained a uniquely influential player and a voice of conscience on US relations with the government and the people of El Salvador. So there really is truly nobody better placed than Congressman Jim McGovern to kick off this conversation with some opening reflections on the way in which the US Congress and the new administration are viewing events in El Salvador and what we may expect in the months to come. Congressman McGovern, welcome once again. A pleasure to have you back at the Inter-American Dialogue. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your kind words. I want to thank the Inter-American Dialogue, WOLA, Cristosal, and the Due Process of Law Foundation for hosting this important discussion on the impact of the recent elections and the state of democracy in El Salvador. You have a great panel that will follow me, who I think really know a lot more and have better insights than I do. But I'm happy to be on a program with all of them. They're my friends, and I have great respect for them. You know, as Michael said, I've been traveling to El Salvador for nearly 4 decades. My first trip was back in 1983 when I worked for Congressman Joe Moakley from Boston. He had met with some constituents during some local office hour visits. He met with a group called the Jamaica Plain Committee on Central America in the Jamaica Plain Post Office, which is in his district. And he later met with a number of Salvadoran refugees who were in the Boston area. And they described a country at war, where people lived in a constant state of fear, where many were killed or persecuted or just simply disappeared. And so Joe Moakley wasn't a foreign policy expert. He used to joke that a foreign policy issue to him was driving from South Boston to East Boston for an Italian sandwich. So he called me up. I just started working for him, and he says, I'm hearing all this. Is it true? I said, well, all I know is what I've read. He said, well, why don't you go to El Salvador and check it out, and to find out firsthand and report back to him whether these stories were indeed true. Now, I didn't speak Spanish. I didn't know anybody in El Salvador, but I checked with a few NGOs, talked to some committee staff, got the names of a few people to meet with in San Salvador. I got on a plane, and the rest is history. On that first trip, and those that followed, some of the people I met and had long, profound conversations with were the faculty and staff at the University of Central America, the UCA, in San Salvador. I mean, when I first visited was with Father Martin Barreau, and I remember after a long conversation, I asked, "Is there anything that you want me to bring back to Washington? Any kind of message?" And he said, "Yes, just tell members of Congress and staff that we here in El Salvador, we're human beings too, and don't forget it." I also, over the years, met with, Father Ignacio Ellacuria, with Father Segundo Montes as well. Father Segundo Montes was very, very helpful in providing us information about the status of Salvadorans who had been deported back to El Salvador. And Father Ellacuria was brilliant, intimidating, but brilliant. On November 16th, 1989, many of their voices were silenced when U.S. trained and armed troops, the Atlacat Battalion, entered the campus of the UCA and murdered 6 Jesuit priests in cold blood and 2 women who were also on the campus, their housekeeper and her young daughter. When then Speaker of the House, Tom Foley, created a commission to investigate these murders, he appointed Joe Moakley to lead it. And Joe once again asked me to go to El Salvador and work with him to find out the truth. The findings of the Moakley Commission, which identified members of the military high command as the intellectual orders, as being responsible for ordering and covering up the murders of these priests and 2 women, ended up paving the way for Congress to cut U.S. military aid to El Salvador in half and conditioning the other half on a trial of those who murdered the Jesuit priests and on peace negotiations to end the conflict once and for all. It was the first time that Congress had done anything meaningful with regard to military aid to El Salvador. The Moakley Commission's final report is still used in court proceedings today, including the recent trial and conviction in Spain on the Jesuit murders. But what those experiences, all those many years ago, did for me is establish a deep and abiding commitment to the people of El Salvador and their efforts to build a peaceful, democratic, and inclusive society. One that respects human rights and puts an end to impunity. I've never stopped traveling to El Salvador. Over the last 30 years, the Salvadoran people have achieved great change in their country. Following the historic 1992 peace accords that ended the war, El Salvador has carried out many successful elections. Former adversaries created political parties and competed at the ballot box, not on the battlefield. The military retired to its barracks and refrained from interfering in political decisions. A national police force was created, and schools and health clinics opened in many of the hardest hit regions of the country. And more recently, 2 national commissions were established to search for the disappeared. The first, institutionalizing Father Cortiner's efforts to search for the missing Salvadoran children who were basically sold for adoption abroad. And the second, Conabúsqueda, to search for the thousands of disappeared adults whose families have never been able to find peace in the absence of any knowledge about their missing loved ones. And both are so incredibly important, especially for El Salvador to move on. I was with Lenore. We were there at the announcement of Buchelle, and I remember we were at the UCA at an event, and we invited people to come and to offer their guidance on such a commission. And I was amazed at how many people showed up with pictures of loved ones who had disappeared years earlier. And here's the interesting thing. A number of the people that showed up were young children holding pictures of their grandmother or grandfather or uncle who had disappeared. They were born after the war had ended. But the bottom line is you can't move on unless there's truth. Much remains to be done in El Salvador. The rise of gang violence, for which the U.S. holds grave responsibility, threatens the daily life and security of every community in El Salvador. Poverty, the lack of opportunity, relentless violence, natural disasters, and climate change are among the many factors driving internal displacement and migration. These are complex issues. They do not have short-term solutions. Corruption among elites and within the government remains constant. It was a key factor in people leaving the traditional political parties and carrying President Bukele to power. But it stalks the Bukele administration as well. So while progress has been made in addressing past corruption and promoting the rule of law, the culture of impunity has never been broken. This is why prosecuting cases like the 1981 massacre at El Mozote is so incredibly important. And I want to recognize the courageous and the meticulous work of the presiding judge in that case, Judge Jorge Guzman. Against all odds, he has professionally pursued the facts in this case, no matter where they might lead. He has done this despite threats against his life, despite the obstruction of justice by the Ministry of Defense, and despite attacks against him by the current president of El Salvador and his administration. Now, I hope that the current Attorney General also demonstrates courage and supports the years of work by Judge Guzman. It would be a blow to justice and the rule of law should the Attorney General end up being just one more obstacle in the decades-long battle to determine in a court of law what happened in El Mozote and hold accountable those responsible. Right now, in my opinion, democracy and rule of law are at a crossroads in El Salvador. Many members of Congress and the Biden-Harris administration are deeply, deeply, deeply concerned. Nayib Bukele overwhelmingly won the presidential elections in 2019. I remember I met with him shortly before his victory when he was in Washington, D.C. And I told him that I had met with many in the Salvadoran diaspora in the United States, many young people who were very, very excited about the prospects of him becoming president. I also told him I met with some others who worried that he reminded them of Donald Trump too much, and wanted assurances that, in fact, he was somebody who was truly dedicated to democracy and the rule of law. And I recognize the hope that he represented to so many in El Salvador who, quite frankly, were disillusioned by the corruption and ineffectiveness of the FMLN and array of parties and party leaders. I met with President Bukele again in El Salvador in August of 2019, when I was in El Salvador on a delegation that was led by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. At the time, he had been president for about 10 weeks. I was encouraged by the promises he and his cabinet made to the Speaker of the House and our congressional delegation to respect human rights, to end corruption and the culture of impunity, to support the judicial investigation of the El Mozote case, and to uphold the rule of law and good governance. He said all the right things. But since that time, I've been worried and disappointed by many of his actions and statements. They indicate a disturbing trend toward authoritarian rule rather than a strengthening of democracy. Senators and members of Congress have expressed concerns about attempts to undermine the basic rights of the Salvadoran press. We've expressed concerns about attempts to undermine civil society and to undermine and threaten political opponents, who express views that might be critical of the Bukele administration. I mean, these are dangerous trends that should concern all of us. I can promise you this, that the United States Congress will continue to closely monitor the events in El Salvador. We will continue to express concerns as they arise, and we will continue to we will continue to evaluate U.S. aid and relations and how best we can support democracy, human rights, and good governance. Now, a week ago, municipal and legislative elections were held, and President Bukele's New Ideas Party was the overwhelming winner. In the coming months, the new National Assembly will be appointing or reappointing the Attorney General and several Supreme Court magistrates. The very balance of power and the separation of powers will be tested in El Salvador by how the National Assembly chooses to determine and make these appointments. The question is, will the President and the National Assembly, who came to power through democratic means, use those democratic levers to advance authoritarian rule? The United States and El Salvador have a long history during times of war and peace. We will continue to have a close and hopefully productive relationship. But in the days and the weeks and months ahead, we in Congress will be carefully watching and weighing whether the Bukele government remains a reliable partner, and whether it's an administration that is dedicated to protecting and promoting democracy and basic human rights, or whether it isn't. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Everyone in the U.S. and El Salvador and throughout Latin America for caring so deeply about El Salvador, its people, and its future. And let me just close with this. People ask me, like, why do you keep going back to El Salvador? I mean, after all these years, I mean, you know, why do you keep going back? And the answer is because I have fallen in love with the country and the people of that country. I've established friendships that will last a lifetime. I've also lost a lot of friends. And I've also seen firsthand how the people of El Salvador have suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered. I mean, they lived through a terrible war that unfortunately the United States supported without any regard for upholding a standard of human rights. In the aftermath of the war, the United States walked away. So did the international community. And rather than helping that country rebuild, we left it in a way where you could see the rise of gang violence. In fact, one of the things we exported to El Salvador were gang members that were in our jails. And now, at a time when we want El Salvador to succeed, its very democracy is under threat. And it is a deep concern. So, you know, people like all of us on this call are friends of El Salvador. We care about the future of El Salvador. We care about the people of El Salvador. I represent a substantial Salvadoran diaspora in Massachusetts who talk to me about these issues all the time. And I think we, in the United States in particular, we have a special and a moral obligation to be there for the people. People deserve better. They deserve better. And we need to call out these dangerous trends away from democracy. These days, it seems like we're going back to the days when high government officials make threats against their political critics in a way that puts their own lives in danger. And we need to be there to do everything we can to make sure that in some of these big cases, like the El Mozote case, that there is truth and there is justice. So I appreciate the opportunity of sharing these thoughts with you, and I now turn it over to the experts. And again, thank you so much.
Congressman McGovern, thank you so much for being with us today, for your remarks and for your strong and continued commitment to human rights and to El Salvador.
Thank you.
We greatly appreciate it. And thank you everybody for joining us, and to our speakers. I'd like to continue and piggyback on the Congressman's remarks, the priorities and concerns raised for members of Congress here, and ask each one of you how you see the change of administration here in the U.S. impacting El Salvador and U.S. relations toward El Salvador. Let's start with you, Noah.
Thank you, Adriana, and saludos to my fellow panelists and everybody following us today. And it's great to see our friend Jim McGovern. I think that when we think about the shift in U.S. policy and the relationship with El Salvador, it's always good to remember historic precedent. And I think when the United States looks at Central America through the prism of one geopolitical issue, the United States has been willing, therefore, to make trade-offs in human rights and democracy. That's what happened through the Dirty War period and in the Salvadoran Civil War, and what happened during the Trump administration. The Trump administration had one singular priority, which was reducing migration through a deterrent strategy, which institutionalized cruelty to migrants. And as long as the governments in the region were willing to go along with that strategy and not confront on it, then the United States would turn a blind eye to the issues that Congressman McGovern pointed out: democracy, rule of law, and others. So I think we're at a turning point where the Biden administration is saying that we want to talk about what we think the root causes of migration are, and not only try and deter it through repressive means. And that opens up a range of new conversations that have to be had, that Jim outlined it in his remarks, around rule of law, around governance, around corruption specifically. And I think that will lead to a confrontation if it hasn't already. It's important to think about how the Bukele's administration's diplomacy has been in Washington. I think that they haven't yet understood necessarily that popularity in El Salvador won't necessarily translate into diplomatic agreements on key issues affecting the regions. They've spent millions of dollars on lobbyists and not necessarily understanding that the Biden administration wants concrete results on issues like corruption, for example, which the Bukele administration used as an issue to crush his political opponents, but has used corruption mostly as a tribal issue, kind of saying that the corruption of people that came before me is bad, and don't ask me about transparency and corruption right now. I'm doing what I have to do. So I think in some ways it'll be important to see how the relationship on the dialogue on these issues pan out. But I think the important part is to remember that we have antecedents here from the Washington standpoint. The model of governance that we've seen from Nayib Bukele is not new. His party's name is New Ideas, but I think people in Washington recognize this populist authoritarianism as similar to a model that we've seen in Venezuela, Nicaragua, among other countries. And the trajectory of that model is one that is contrary to the strengthening of democracy and rule of law. And so I think that those are the challenges that will be facing the bilateral relationship.
Thank you, Noah. Julia, how do you see the change of administration affecting relations?
Thank you, Adriana. Well, thank you for this invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to share this panel with, Noah and Leonor as well. Well, I think something that I can add to this idea is that Bukele presidency emphasizes accountability is not necessary for a democratic state. This is one of the biggest problems that I see, that when, for example, when we are doing our work and we cannot have access to how this administration is controlling or what it's doing with the political and public and all this administration. I think Joe Biden administration is very clear about the transparency and press freedom. It's necessary for this country, and the government that doesn't think that this is necessary, well, won't be an ally for the U.S. and we don't see that in the Bukele's administration. In our specific case as independent press, well, one of our biggest concerns is that our job as journalists is to follow the steps of those who administrate people's money and are the one responsible for public administration. I think that after the election of last weekend, there is an extreme concentration of power. Well, Bukele has won 55 of 84 seats in the parliament, enough to take decisions without the opposition. So that means that he doesn't need for example, the FMLN or Arena to change the Attorney General, the Supreme Court justices, or pass laws without any objections. So that means that if we go back and see that there is necessary to work with transparency, well, he doesn't need anyone or anything to do or to demonstrate what is he's doing. So that's one of the biggest issues that I see. And the other thing that, well, because Biden's administration has been very clear about it, it's that we have to, there has to be a respect of the rule of law. And well, we see here officials that they skip the law. There's like a perception that they can violate any law, and there's like a protection from the government, the institution, as for example, the national police, that we saw, for example, if I can show a case, I can talk about what happened here on January 31st, after when we saw that 3 security officers attacked militaries from the left-wing party, FMLN, when they were coming back from an event. So and at that moment, President Bukele, he just tweeted something like, saying that was like the same part the FMLN was doing that attack to themselves. And what we see, and what we still seeing, is that there's like a lot of protection from the government and from the institutions to protect these kind of situations. So this is very close, or well, this is very nearby what we need to talk. When we start talking about transparency, this is part of what we need to start pointing out about what Bukele is doing, like in a bad, not in a correct way. And for example, another thing that just happened was last weekend when 2 members of the FMLN party, 2 women politicians, suffered harassment from a man who worked for the government. And that's what we see. We see like a culture of impunity that keep continue with this government. And that's why I see this as one of the problems that probably can make this or can be like a biggest problem for the Biden administration.
Thank you, Julia. Leonor, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Adriana, and thank you to the Inter-American Dialogue for co-hosting this event with DPLF, Wola, and Cristosal. I just want to say that I'm very happy to share this panel with 2 brilliant women in the International Day of Women, with Adriana and Julia. And hopefully the analysis that we are providing today will be useful for what's going on in El Salvador right now. Definitely the tone of the relation between US and El Salvador has changed dramatically since the new administration took office, the new Biden administration took office. As we all know, President Bukele was quick to embrace former President Donald Trump's hardline immigration policies, among others, like restricting asylum requests, which at the time won him a great deal, right, of US support for also his total government style in El Salvador, where we can't deny that he is very popular. But definitely, like other world leaders befriended by Trump, former President Trump, he faces now trouble, right, to engage in a new, different relation with the Biden administration. Definitely, there are strong signs from the new administration that is seeking to undo some policies from the Trump administration, and definitely the Biden administration has given several signs that is the relation with El Salvador is under review. We all heard that the president surprise trip to U.S. Amid a pandemic posed a dilemma for many U.S. policymakers. They were given little advance notice, and besides, most of them were avoiding in-person meetings due to the pandemic. But beyond that, definitely the fact that some policymakers of the new administration denied to meet Bukele in person sent like a strong message that they wanted to avoid Bukele to use like this image of being in a good relation with U.S. Through a surprise trip. So definitely, I mean, in rejecting this Bukele's request, Biden officials wanted to ensure, right, that Bukele didn't try to show any meetings as support, even before the legislative elections took place. So now the Biden administration has made very clear that the fight against corruption and rule of law are like at the center of their agenda. And at the same time, as Congressman McGovern made it very clear today, this very concerning authoritarianism trends is making everybody here in the U.S. and in the Biden administration to rethink the relationship with El Salvador. So I think that even though Bukele has strong support from people in El Salvador, still, he needs a good relation with the U.S. For different reasons, right? It's a strong ally, and definitely it is going to be a wise decision for Bukele to review his engagement with the dialogue in the U.S. Democrat officials, as Congressman McGovern, have shown support for El Salvador for a really long time, and they will keep working and collaborating with El Salvador, but they need to see that things are changing in El Salvador, and that the strong popular support that the president Bukele has from El Salvador population is being used for the good of people and for enforcing rule of law, including separation of powers and check and balances, and not for attacking any sector that is not in accordance with what Bukele is saying, or in Bukele's politics.
Thank you, Leonor. Now, looking more closely at the situation on the ground, and this has already been alluded to or noted, the growing concern about democratic backsliding and attacks against the rule of law under President Bukele. Curious, Leonor, if you can expand a bit on this point and how the results of the recent legislative and municipal elections will favor or facilitate this further backsliding in El Salvador, and what are the key issues that we should be keeping an eye on?
The recent midterm elections in El Salvador showed that for the first time in El Salvador, at least since the end of the war, one political party will have not just simple majority in the Congress, Salvadorian Congress, but also the possibility to have a qualified majority. And that will be the key for selecting relevant authorities as the Attorney General and also the justices for the Supreme Court. That's one thing. The other thing that this midterm election has shown is that the collapse of the traditional political parties. I mean, the coming and going of parties is natural, right, in healthy democracies, but the collapse of a party system usually hints at a rot in the state and is a cause of concern. As parties fade and politics start, revolving around personalities, election become personality contests that reward the loud and charismatic people, and that, of course, open the door to populists. In El Salvador, we have seen that established parties, FMLN and Arena, that ruled El Salvador for the last 25 years have become irrelevant. And the dangers of this is that the New Ideas Party, the President Bukele Party, will basically rule with little to no opposition, right, in Congress, and that will give him the opportunity to basically approve any legislation that will lead, for example, or the possibility, for example, to seek for a re-election or basically change the constitution in the way that he wants without listening anybody. So definitely, I mean, Nayib Bukele has transformed the Salvadorian electoral landscape by challenging, right, El Salvador political institutions and norms. And some change is important and it's healthy, but it's very dangerous that this strong wing and this strong support from population is not being used for strengthening democracy, but just for strengthening a small group or just for the purpose of installing a new elite in El Salvador that will basically use the state and state resources for their own purposes, and that is very dangerous. So it's more important than ever now in El Salvador that critical voices and different opinions still needs to be heard by anybody, and that different sectors, civil society, journalists, and international community all work together just to have a healthy democracy where everybody have their chance to say what they think and that their opinions are being taken into account.
Great, thank you, Leonor. Before I pivot to a different topic that has also come up in the Q&A, Julia, I know you follow these issues very closely, so curious if there's anything you want to add about the changes to the political landscape in the country, and perhaps touch on briefly what are some of the key issues that the Assembly is going to take up in the next months that we should be focused on or keeping an attention on.
Well, I think one of the well, we see this like a a problem that probably we are going to have in the next month. It's the election of the Attorney General. That's one of the one of the topics that I think not only people here in El Salvador has to keep an eye out. Also, the international community has to follow what's going to happen with this election, because we are talking about someone who, well, like I said before, we see that there is a culture of impunity that we need to fight. Well, we have impunity for a long time, and right now we don't see the government fighting against that, and they are promoting as well. So that's why what will happen with the Attorney General, it's very important to keep an eye out. And the other thing is about what's going to happen with the Supreme Court, because what we can see is that in the next probably 3 years or less, there's going to be a lot of changes that can give Bukele more power than the one that he already got. So right now, what we see is that we don't have enough access to different information. So that's why I think if we can activate and there's more eyes, and in this what is going right now happening here, probably can help us to fight against the problems that we are detecting right now.
Thank you. Now, it's been said already, that corruption, good governance is a central priority for the Biden administration. And, Bukele's 2019 campaign, as has been mentioned, underscored the idea of creating an internationally backed commission to tackle corruption. The CCS, as it's known, was created in 2019 with the support of the OAS. I know Cristosal and other civil society organizations have been calling for the need to strengthen the commission. So Noah, since you're joining us and also sponsoring the event, I wanted to ask you if you could share your perspective on current efforts to tackle corruption in El Salvador. I know it's been mentioned briefly, but more to the point, to talk to us about why Cristosal and others feel that there's a need to strengthen the CCS, and what is the likelihood of those efforts moving forward given the recent elections?
Yeah, the most important piece, I think, that gives this idea of strengthening the SSC's political viability is that if there's one issue that unites Salvadorans almost unanimously, it is the desire to eliminate corruption, or at least the discourse, an agreement in the discourse to do it, if not in the practice. And so I thought that's one of the reasons that we have prioritized this issue. The other is obviously that corruption in Central America shouldn't be interpreted or reduced to this idea of kickbacks or sobornos, bribes. It's something much bigger. It's an exercise of power. When corruption exists in these states, it requires a network of actors with using state power to create benefits for those groups, those networks and their friends. And in a sense, that means that corruption at this level implies the existence of organized crime. Multiple actors working together to commit crimes using state power. And so it's a sense in Guatemala, Honduras, and in El Salvador, it's taken longer to recognize it. But the organized crime to some degree has co-opted state power and uses that to benefit certain groups of the population, which in itself is a threat to rule of law. And it undermines the ability for social programs to be funded and has other consequences in the life of the democracy. So it's an issue that's of critical importance. The reason that we think the mechanism that the International Commission model is a necessary mechanism is that when we look at states like the Salvadoran state, the Honduran state, the Guatemalan state, they have received for decades financial assistance, training, and other sort of more traditional bilateral assistance for justice sector development, we see that the justice sectors are unable to reform themselves on their own, even with that type of traditional assistance. And so the international commissions are a way for the international community to accompany the justice systems and the societies that they serve in making those necessary reforms, in investigating and prosecuting not only people, high-level people involved in corruption, but the networks behind them, the organized crime, and dismantling it, leaving installed capacities in state institutions and civil society, lifting up expectations in the citizenry about how the justice system should work, and also providing political backing to brave public servants and civil society actors who are trying to make those reforms. So these are the benefits that we see in an international commission. And President Bukele won election really with a mandate to combat, eliminate corruption. Unfortunately, I think his approach to that has been to instrumentalize corruption and the repudiation of the population for corruption as an instrument, as a political tool to crush his opposition, and not necessarily as a call to a real institutional revolution that would, produce effective justice and eliminate the practices and the organized criminal networks that benefit from them. So he did a good thing, in that he moved forward quickly at the beginning of his administration to negotiate with the Organization of American States the establishment of a commission in El Salvador. When we assess that commission, we find that it falls very short of what we would expect based on the standards set in Guatemala and Honduras for similar work, and with lessons learned. And the most simple way to reduce this down to one key thing is that the president never brought the partnership agreement with the OAS to the legislature for ratification, which means that the CICIS is relegated to a commission, a presidential commission, based on the goodwill of the people who signed the partnership agreement. It's not a binding state policy to eradicate corruption and build accountability. And that's what we need. Crystal Sal and our partners, DPLF and other civil society actors who are behind the law, the proposed law, believe that El Salvador does need this international accompaniment, but it must be something that becomes a real public policy. And we have to avoid that it becomes a political tool. So the law achieves a lot of these things. What the law would do is create a binding state policy that would make a cooperation by state institutions with the CICIS an obligation. It creates degrees of independence of the commission itself from the president, the executive. It opens mechanism for greater coordination and work with civil society and transparency. We think that that there is a good possibility that this law gets approved. In this legislature, which has about 6 weeks left before it ends, or in the next. The reason we think it could happen right now is that this legislature will want to leave a legacy. They will want to align themselves with this popular demand to combat corruption and with the United States' clear communication of their goal to work with the region to eliminate corruption. And in the next legislature, if they don't do it in this one, we think that they will have a responsibility to continue the mandate that the president has from the population to eliminate corruption by passing a law that would strengthen the president's own anti-corruption commission. It will be very difficult, we think, for the president to explain why he wouldn't support an initiative proposed by civil society to strengthen his own anti-corruption mechanism. So that's a sort of the summary of both the political aspects of the law and what we hope to achieve. And we think that this law is one of the good opportunities that exist still in El Salvador to strengthen rule of law and democracy.
Thank you, Noah. Just a reminder that the Q&A is open. I know many folks have already sent in their questions, and I'm trying to group these, but if you are out there listening, want to add a question, please don't hesitate. And before I actually open it up to the questions that have come in, I have one last one. Given what you have all mentioned and the possible future scenarios, where do you see the opportunities for U.S. policymakers and civil society, international civil society organizations to play a constructive role? And in particular, how can the U.S., while respecting the results of the elections and the rights of the National Assembly to appoint judges, the Attorney General, and other issues that have been mentioned, help to defend the independence of these institutions and the appointment of individuals who are going to go after corruption, organized crime, and apply the law impartially? And I guess tying it to a question that came in, given the Biden's administration's proposal of a $4 billion multi-year strategy, where do you think that investment should go towards? What priorities? Leonor, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Adriana. International support coming from U.S. government and also international organization is critical at this point in El Salvador. I see different ways, different opportunities for international actors to engage in what's going on in El Salvador. First is that issuing public statements, making clear that anti-corruption and good governance is at the heart of U.S. relations with Central America, and in particular in El Salvador, is very important. That is one thing, public messages, and at the same time to show that all the assistance, the financial, the humanitarian assistance, should be accompanied by benchmarks and strong anti-corruption measures. The second idea is that it's very important to nominate an El Salvador ambassador very soon, someone with a track of human rights and also commitment to protecting human rights and advancing rule of law, and someone who can on the ground to implement dialogues and soft diplomacy while respecting El Salvador's own laws and logics. Third, I think that is time for El Salvador to be, to some individuals from El Salvador to be part of this list of people that is corrupt in El Salvador, to be part of the Magnitsky Act, or also the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, as in the case of Guatemala and Honduras. Going beyond the state, and talking about El Salvador in general, but also pointing specific people from El Salvador that has been identified as people who is engaged in corruption, especially high-level corruption, related to illegal networks. That would be very important to break this narrative that everything that the current government is doing is the right thing. And maybe a fourth idea is that it's very important to be very close monitoring the next elections of the Supreme Court members and also the Attorney General. because so far, maybe in El Salvador, hasn't been that evident that mafia and other illegal networks will try to use these elections to be part of the state and to corrupt institutions, as it has been evident in Guatemala. But I'm pretty sure that in El Salvador, something similar it's been happening, and it will happen in the near future. So it's important to keep an eye on these very important elections, and also to support civil society groups in El Salvador to participate in these elections, and to make them more transparent.
Thank you, Leonor. Noah or Julia, do you have anything to add quickly before I turn it over to the Q&A?
Yeah, Adriana, I'd like to add something to that. I think Leonor is right, and the role of the United States to El Salvador needs to be one of support and accountability. And I think there's an opportunity for the United States to look very carefully at who their partners are. And one of the challenges will be for the United States as they try and hold firm to the line that we have been describing today about democracy and rule of law, is that they'll increasingly not find, it's likely that they won't find great partners. And I think that that's where the United States will have to make key decisions about how to move forward. One of the tendencies in the past of the United States has been to feel a little bit like their hands are tied. When they're trying to work bilaterally on security, they have to work with the police. They have to work with the Minister of Defense. When they're working on justice sector development, their key ally is the Attorney General. And the United States almost feels like once they begin investing in those people, in those institutions, then they tend to back down from really demanding results and accountability from them. So in the case of the Attorney General, I think in what is left of Raul Melara's term, I think the United States needs to ask for results. We need to see accountability and real action from the Attorney General on investigation of key cases that determine the course of democracy and rule of law in El Salvador. The same is true on the directors of the National Civilian Police. The United States needs to talk with El Salvador about the profiles of some of the directors who have human rights violations in their backgrounds, who have been implicated in procedural fraud, investigative fraud, and other abuses in the past. And I think that looking at who is in the leadership in the country, whether it's in the election of the courts or the election of the next Attorney General, really will be determinant on the opportunities. And I think the United States needs to hold the line specifically on that with El Salvador, to say that we want people committed to democracy and rule of law in key leadership positions in the country.
Great. Julia, do you have anything?
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. Yes, I'm just going to add very quickly that, well, as Leonor and Noah said, that it's very important that international community and also the US government follow closely what happens next, because there is a lot of message of misinformation, division and fear that, that what we are talking about, that Bukele has all the communication resources to use that he used when it's necessary for him to activate a unique message that need that to share, the unique message that he needs to share with the ones that are his borders or where with the Salvadorans. He used this message to discrediting alternative voices, and also, we are talking about in these voices the independent journalists. And I want to point out that this fear message has been accepted by people. And even if we know that the press in the past has been harassment or persecuted by Salvadoran government, now we are in a totally different situation. These threats are totally different. And well, people here hate press. People here hate the way we are working and the way we are doing our work, because they think we are part of the opposition. And even if we are very clear that we are not an opposition, that's the message that Bukele has shared to the Salvadoran. And that's the way that they identify independent press. So I think this is the moment that we can do something about, because we know what is happening right now in Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala with human rights and also with the press. So we need to start pointing out right now what's going on here to do something.
Thank you, Julia. So I'm opening it up, reviewing the questions. There was one question, and given that it's International Women's Day, I'll start with this one. Yesterday, thousands of women marched in El Salvador streets, protesting for the high numbers of femicides, sexual violence, the lack of human rights and rule of law. They also marched for the women wrongfully imprisoned up to 30 years for suffering obstetric emergencies, including miscarriages and stillbirths. So the question is how the Biden and Harris administration and Congress can help the women's movement to make sure that El Salvador guarantees their human rights, especially their reproductive rights. Leonor, do you want to take this one?
Thank you, Adriana. I think that the women's movement in El Salvador, feminist movement, is the hope in El Salvador. It's a very strong movement, and it's very legit, very valid. And I think that the international community, including U.S. government, should support this movement. Now has become like one of the strongest voices in El Salvador, and definitely El Salvador is witnessing some important and very worrying setbacks in terms of participation of women in political scenarios. For example, now in the new General Assembly that will take office in May, right? The number of women has dropped from previous years, and so the gender agenda will probably have some setbacks too. So this is the time to support women from civil society groups, and also trying to support women that are part of the justice system, and probably to appoint a new general attorney that should be for the first time in El Salvador a woman, of course, a woman with all the qualifications. And yes, the criminalization of women that have gone through of some miscarriages is key in El Salvador. This is something that needs to be addressed. No more women, that have never committed a crime should be in prison in El Salvador. The Inter-American Court, the Human Rights Inter-American Court, will soon have a trial against El Salvador for one of these cases, the Manuela case, and probably this will be like the first judgment on this issue. So El Salvador soon will face an international condemn for this kind of criminalization. So for different reasons, and definitely El Salvador needs to change this policy of criminalization of women in different areas, and in particular regarding reproductive rights. And at the same time, the women's movement and the participation of women in political spaces also should be part of the mainstreaming, and also and the agenda of relation between U.S. and El Salvador.
Thank you, Leonor. There were a couple of questions that maybe Noah, you can take this one. One was on the anti-corruption mechanism, the proposal that you mentioned. Curious if you could provide a bit more detail on how that will connect to the proposal of the Biden administration to create or promote a regional anti-corruption mechanism. There was also another question that looked more from the Bukele administration and whether you've seen any hints that they will promote a regional approach through agreements with neighboring countries, negotiations to address transnational transborder issues, organized crime, or irregular migration.
Yeah, well, with the seceded law, there are two processes in place. One that's happening nationally in El Salvador, and another one that's been proposed by the Biden administration to create a regional mechanism to combat corruption. One of the big challenges that the Biden administration will face in trying to implement a regional commission or mechanism is finding state partners, governments that will be willing to build that commission with him. So that's where we see the opportunity as well with the CECIAs. If we are able to strengthen the CECIAs, make it more independent, then we see that as kind of staking a claim on some ground for the fight against corruption in the region that could be built off of. The processes that happen around the CECIAs in El Salvador that strengthen civil society could then be built out to strengthen other actions in Guatemala and Honduras. One of the principal things that people are thinking about in terms of a regional commission is that might be something that gets done with civil society partners. The Biden administration has said, or people around the Biden administration have recognized that when the United States thinks about partnering in the region, they're not exclusively talking about governments. They want to engage more deeply with civil society. And I think that's a really positive strategy when we think about combating corruption. We need to be able to figure out a way in this region to democratize the fight against corruption. It can't just be seen as a technical thing that attorney generals do. I think accountability and the expectation for justice and high standards for public office are things that emerge from public demands. So in some ways, these two processes, the CECIAs law in El Salvador and the proposal for a regional commission kind of emerge separately. But I think in the current context, there are two bets that we're making in the region, like I said, to stake a claim on some ground for the fight against corruption after closing of the CECIG and the MOXIE, and off of that ground, hope to build up greater capacity to address those issues in the region.
Thank you, Noah. We have a couple of questions on the issue of security and gangs, and I know El Faro has reported a lot on this. So I'm gonna hand this one over to you, Julia. One question, was asking more about why the high levels of gang violence in El Salvador. If what factors are contributing to this, and another was more focused on. The El Faro has reported on the alleged negotiations of the Bukele administration with MS-13. And the question is, how would you recommend the U.S. respond to these reported negotiations?
Well, I think this is related very close with what we were talking about transparency, because the problem right now that we have with to understand what's going on with the levels of homicides or with the gangs in El Salvador is that we don't really know what's the plan of security. We know that we are not going to ask to the government the top security plans, but at least we want to know what are they doing in the communities with the youth, and what are their what are part of all of this work that that it's supposed that it's helping to reduce the numbers. The fact is, well, that as Alfaro has published, there has been a lot of information that that confirmed that the government has negotiations with the gangs, and that's why what we are asking is to know more, to have more information about this kind of security strategies. And well, the government, it's well, as like I said before, they are always using misinformation to discredit these kind of pieces and well, all the publications that the media is doing. And what I think is the US has to follow closely about this. Well, the transparency that the government is, how the government is dealing with this problem, because we knew that, and we know very clear that in 2012 we have negotiations with the government and the gangs, and that one didn't finish pretty well. So that's why one of our concerns is to understand more about this, to have more access to this information, and to the U.S. government support a lot El Salvador with money and funds to invest in communities with young people. So that's why at least we want to know where this money, where is exactly this money, and how they are working with this money. So the U.S., I think, can do so much more in this part of the security plans, and well, showing a little bit more about the information about where exactly are putting their money.
Thank you, Julia. We've gotten a couple of questions related to the IMF loan. So as you all know, El Salvador is facing a funding gap, and they have been negotiating an IMF loan of around 1.3 billion. One question, wonders, how do you think the money, if approved, the loan will be used? How much doubt is there that there'll be the right level of oversight, or questions around corruption? And another, given this funding gap, how will the U.S. administration, put pressure on the Salvadoran government to improve the issues of rule of law, corruption that you've discussed, alongside any IMF programming? Or will it eventually look past these discretions for fear of the likes of China being an alternative to address this funding gap? I don't know who wants to take this one.
Yeah, Adriana, I'll try. It's a big question, and I don't want to speculate too much about what's happening at the IMF. But we do have some precedents in El Salvador about the way the Bukele administration likes to administer funds in terms of transparency. And the administration was, the previous, or this Congress approved loans really with astronomical levels for this government during the COVID crisis. And even prior to that, you remember 9/11, the famous invasion of the assembly, was about a loan for security. And so the president has insisted that he needs access to more liquidity to be able to implement his programs. And he has mostly done that by gutting the Access for Information Institute, reserving public information about public health statistics and finances. And so that's the trend that we have. The opportunity for the IMF is to outline standards about transparency and hold to them. I know some of my colleagues who work more specifically on issues of transparency sometimes feel like conditionality for loans, once the check is signed, gets washed out to sea because there's already a financial interest in making sure that the loans come to fruition. So I think that that's the opportunity, is to kind of turn the page on that. And in relation to the conditionality, I think that's what's being talked about. But I think there's also another issue that should be brought up. One of the things that we should have, with the advent of such absolute power that the president has now, we should aspire to great things. He has political capital that no other politician in the history of El Salvador has ever had. So that means that he could implement a fiscal reform that the FMLN in 10 years never could do. The Salvadoran government is financed on a regressive tax system. So it would be an opportunity to reform the fiscal system and bring the Salvadoran government into better fiscal health. Among other things, linking it to Julia's comments, this president could lead this country to a peace process, a transparent peace process, in which his immense popularity could move sectors of society to support rehabilitation and reinsertion of gang members, instead of continuing to divide and stigmatize them. So that's what we need, is the president to use his tremendous power to do the things that no one else has been able to do. What concerns us all is what you've been hearing throughout this whole panel, is that it seems like the objective of this government is that the president himself is the ends. We sometimes say that the means justify the ends, but all of the abuse of power, all of the corruption, the illegality, the challenge of norms seems to be in function of consolidating power around the president.
Thank you, Noah. There was a question for you, Leonor, to better understand the implications of the Nuevas Ideas victory and power in Congress to appoint Supreme Court justices. If you could expand and give us, a sense of how partisan or not the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Chamber in particularly have been over the past couple of administrations.
Sure. As I was saying, the final decision on exactly how many seats will have Nuevas Ideas in the Congress will be, as far as I know, decided, I don't know, next week or in the coming weeks. But so far, we know that definitely the New Ideas Party has won the majority of the 84 members of the National Assembly. And that it means that in the next selection process of the members of the Supreme Court, new ideas will have very easily to negotiate with other parties. For example, Ghana, which is the political party that led to the Bukele to the presidency. So Nuevas Ideas and also Ghana will very easily have the multi-majority, the qualified majority to select the next, not only the next members of the Supreme Court, but in particular the next president of the Supreme Court. And also will have the opportunity to select the next Attorney General. The current mandate of the Attorney General would end in December. In the last year, we've seen that the Bukele administration and the General Assembly battled for several months on pandemic rules and legislation. And in most cases, the final decision on which of the other two powers were right came from the constitutional chamber of the Supreme Court. So this constitutional chamber, which is presided by also the president of the Supreme Court. So the president of the Supreme Court is the president of the constitutional chamber. So this is a key chamber. As I was saying, in the last year, this chamber played a key role in trying to stop the abuses that were coming from presidential decisions on on different pandemic situations. And in previous years, also the Constitutional Court and the Constitutional Chamber was a very important institution in basically upholding the rule of law and being a key actor in strengthening the independence of powers. So if you control the Supreme Court and at the same time the Attorney General and make them just to be part of your plan, that would be very, very dangerous for El Salvador. So it's, as I was saying, those are extremely relevant election processes that will take in the coming months. And we need to be very active in monitoring what's going on, not only with the processes, but also with the candidates and their profiles. And we need to try to make as much pressure as we can for those processes to become transparent and to have like the results that favor rule of law in El Salvador.
Thank you. We have about, I want to leave time for any final remarks from the three of you, but a couple of questions that have come in. One is on the role of the military and what explains the military's close relationship to Bukele and acceptance of the measures that have been implemented by his administration. I don't know who wants to take this one. No,
I'll start if you want, and then maybe Julia can help me follow up. But it's a good question, and I think one of the key case studies to try and answer that question is the case of the El Mozote trial, where Crystal Sal, as part of the legal team representing the victims, made a request to the judge in the case for a search warrant to verify the existence of documents whose existence was proven in the trial in inspections of the military archives. And the president said in public statements that he gave an order to the Minister of Defense to block and obstruct those inspections. And so what you see there is something changed. It's not necessarily, I don't think, that the president wanted to protect the high command of the armed forces from 1980 to 1984. Rather, he was moving to protect the role of the military in society. That's to say that the military should not be subjected to civilian justice, and therefore a civilian judge should not be able to oblige them to cooperate in the investigation of a case involving over 1,000 people who were massacred by the armed forces. I bring that up because I think that there is one of the most important trends in the democratic setback that we've been talking about, and that is the politicization of the military and the police. And that's obviously an agreement that the military will return to a role in which they are above the law, above civilian law, and in exchange they provide political support for the president. We saw that even last week, where the Minister of Defense participated on a television show and he questioned the electoral tribunal and the way that they were handling the vote counts. And he even used statements like saying that the system itself is putrefied and needs to be changed. And this is a big shift. This is part of an evolution that began maybe before Bukele, but to have a Minister of Defense making statements about an election is alarming. And thinking about in the United States, where former ministers of defense and members of the military high command made statements saying they wouldn't be involved in the elections in the United States. So where we see some of the breaks that existed in the United States to try and to uphold rule of law against a populist semi-authoritarian government or president like Donald Trump, those don't exist now in El Salvador. We've seen a similar pattern with the National Civilian Police as they have disobeyed orders from the court, disobeyed instructions from the legislature, and even blocked investigations ordered by the Attorney General in violation of the Constitution, and doing that under the orders of the executive or in political interest of the executive. So it's a trend that we see that's worrying, and that's a little bit how we're observing it.
Thank you, Noah. So two, in the interest of time, I don't want to expand too much, questions, and then you can decide who wants to answer them. One, is with regards to U.S. policy, and how should the U.S. approach advancing democracy and institutional strengthening in El Salvador while being responsive to the popularity of the Bukele government, as seen in recent elections, and to the widespread repudiation of involvement of the international community in Salvadoran affairs. The other questions that came in relate to, there's been, comparisons with other regional leaders. So one, if you could expand on the differences and comparisons between the Bukele administration and the Ortega government in Nicaragua, given the levels of repression there, and another's with regards to Venezuela, and if there are any differences with how with Venezuela and the early years of the Chavez government there. I don't know who wants to take which.
I don't know if I can make like a very detailed differences and similarities between Bukele and Ortega and Maduro, but I can certainly say that they share some characteristics that are very worrying. And one is that they attacked opposition, and by opposition I mean not only political parties, but also any sector that is against their words. In the case of El Salvador, we've seen journalists, human rights defenders, women activists, and almost everybody that is not part of their circle. And the other characteristic is that they disregard rule of law and the independence of power in the name of a government that it's supposedly addressing all the population needs, and they do not comply with the judgment coming from any national or international institution. And also they use the military and police force as political allies, as Noah was explaining. And of course, they lack of transparency and accountability. They have a very administrations that lack of transparency, and they don't believe in giving public information. So those are, even though they come from different political ideologies, they all share these characteristics, and not only these three countries, but we could also talk about former President Correa in Ecuador and others in Latin America. So every time that we see those characteristics, it's important to see these patterns that will finally come into a country that freedom is not respected, and that this wide popular support eventually will turn into a really high levels of demand from people. Right, so this could happen in El Salvador. Eventually, all this strong population support could play against Bukele, and he should be aware of that, and that he has the opportunity to make things different, because this popular support will not last forever, and he should not waste this opportunity to transform El Salvador.
Okay. Julia, Noah, do you want to take the other question? I know we there's another event planned for 4, so I want to be cognizant of the time.
I was going to ask you if you can share me again the first question.
Oh, sure. So yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm keeping. So the question was how the U.S. Should approach, the goal of trying to advance democracy, strengthen institutions in El Salvador, while being responsive to the popularity of the Bukele administration, as we saw by the recent election results, and the repudiation of involvement of the international community in Salvadoran affairs.
Well, I think that what the U.S. government has to be very closely is to try to see if the El Salvador's government is respecting the rule of law. We know that the Biden administration, like we said before, is not going to have an ally that is not respecting transparency or is not fighting against corruption. So we know that there's few problems, and well, we have a lot of issues that right now we haven't resolved yet, because the pandemic has been impacting a lot in El Salvador. So after what happened with the COVID-19 situation, we need to see the real results of the government, the El Salvador's government, and all the strategies that they are using to fight against not only corruption, fight against the poverty, because we know that our economy is going to be pretty bad after all of this. So I think this is the moment that the U.S. government can approach to the El Salvador's Nayib Bukele administration to see what are the plans that he has for the future, because we know that there's a lot of funds involved right now, and because we, at least from the work that we are doing, as well the press is doing, we cannot we don't know anything about these 2 years, that it's hard for us to know what Bukele has been doing in 2 years. So, that's what I think that can be an exit.
Thank you, Julia. A lot of questions, more questions, but we have run out of time. And there's another event starting at 4. I wanted to thank all of you, Leonor, Noah, Julia, Congressman McGovern, the dialogue, for joining us today. And for those listening, I know this event will be posted. I guess with the last minute, if either Noah or Leonor have 30-second final remarks before we close.
Yeah, I appreciate in the chat some of the pushback we've got on drawing comparisons between the Bukele administration and other regimes. But I think that what I responded in the chat was that we're not saying that they're the same. We're saying that there's an existing pattern that allows us to raise red flags. And those patterns, we see them playing out very clearly in El Salvador. We haven't come to the point of mass atrocities or grave human rights violations necessarily, but there are indicators and there have been abuses. And I think that what's important to remember is that in this context, democracy is not an abstraction. The period of the worst human rights violations and mass atrocities on the American continent in modern times was ended with the establishment of the democratic norms and institutions that we now see in decline. So that means that democracy itself is something worth defending in the region, because it protects lives, because it is the tool to push back against a known pattern of concentration of power, authoritarianism that doesn't usually in history or in the region lead to a greater respect for human rights. And so while we hope for the best for the president, we hope that he uses the tremendous opportunity that the Salvadoran people have given to him to transform the society. We are very cautious.
I think that there's always the opportunity to have conversations with the El Salvador government, and I don't think that is that respecting rule of law and respecting the public support that Bukele has are opposite things. I think that the U.S. government can engage in dialogue with the government, taking into account that he has a strong popular support, which is an advantage, and at the same time making very clear that that strong support should be used for advancing rule of law and in general to make lives from people in El Salvador better. And in that sense, even though it seems that sometimes the Bukele government has rejected international support or international messages, I'm quite sure that there's always some doors that will open once the Biden administration approaches to the government. And at the same time, this dialogue should also be with different actors, including civil society in El Salvador.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone again. Thank you for joining us today. We will continue this conversation, I'm sure. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, the dialogue, for